Most UFC fans have only ever witnessed the modern UFC format. Each fighter on a card fights once per night, they barely get paid, and they most likely won't be allowed to fight for at least another month for their own safety. But this is not at all how the UFC started and not how the originators imagined it evolving into today. Besides the part where they pay them as little as possible. They would probably enjoy that aspect, to be fair. You see, back in 1993 in Denver, Colorado, the UFC got its start at UFC 1: The Beginning. The concept was, quote unquote, 8 of the deadliest fighters in the world would meet in a no-holds-barred combat to determine who is the ultimate fighting champion. No rules, no judges, no weight classes, and no time limit. Essentially, 8 completely different professional fighters entered a fighting tournament where if you win, you advance and fight again that same day as soon as they are ready for you. Of course, Royce Gracie won this tournament known as UFC 1 and a few more times afterwards, which led to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and eventually the UFC taking off in popularity. But along the way, the UFC had to drastically clean up its act to remain legal and profitable, which led to almost every original rule of this sport being thrown out the window. But what if the UFC went back to its origins for a card or two with modern day fighters? Well, UFC 5 has us covered. They have a tournament section of this game that allows fighters from any weight class to join, and most importantly, it has an option that allows damage from one fight to carry into the next. So I'll be creating this tournament using 8 fighters from the UFC 304 card, allowing the computers to determine the outcomes to see who would be the real ultimate fighter in 2024. Obviously, UFC 5 doesn't have every fighter on the card, but they had more than enough to make this an interesting tournament. Speaking of, if you would like to have some input on the next alter egos to be included in UFC 5, get on UFC 5, go to Fight Week, then to Community Vote, and select up to 4 alter ego fighters on this page that you want to see added into the game. I strongly encourage you to go with my guy, UFC 244 Jorge Masvidal, but the choice is yours. Voting ends July 28th at noon. The matchups in this tournament definitely wouldn't be their preferred choice on who they would fight in today's MMA, but for today, that's too bad. Heavyweight champion Tom Aspinall will face Giga Chikadze. Below him, Bilal Muhammad will face Paddy the Baddy. On the other side, we have Curtis Blaydes fighting a man who is less than half his weight, Manel Kape. And lastly, we have the welterweight champ Leon Edwards taking on Bobby Green. Tom Aspinall is over 100 pounds heavier than Giga, so this fight is clearly rigged in his favor. But Giga is a world-class kickboxer, and in this type of tournament, even if you know you can't win, you can still sabotage your opponent in the next round with damage. But it took Giga 10 seconds to say screw everything that he's worked on in his entire career, and he took Tom down. He had full mount here and there, he did absolutely nothing with it. Tom inevitably reversed him and did a lot of damage from the top. Giga attempted an armbar from the bottom, but that didn't work. Tom thought about going for a submission of his own, but he changed his mind and decided to beat his face in for the last seconds of the first round for him trying him in the first place. The second round didn't go much better for Giga. His best moment of the round was another submission attempt that didn't work. He made it back to the stool, but he needs Claritin ASAP. It just kept getting worse from here. The very first punch of the third round knocked down Giga. Tom started going off on his face, and when he grew tired of that, he tried ripping off his arm. Somehow he survived another round of this just to come out once again and get knocked down by the very first punch. I'll give it to him, Giga's got a bit of a chin. Hell, you could even say he's got a strong forehead. But eventually Herb Dean stopped this fight. Tom is moving on to the next round with minimal damage. He's got blood on him, but I don't think any of that is his. In our next fight, Paddy went for an early takedown, which is generally a bad idea against any UFC fighter whose forehead keeps dust bunnies on it, but he did alright for himself and won the first round. Bilal got on top in the second round, so little to nothing happened for 5 minutes. Bilal got another early takedown in the third, but Paddy got on top and did the first real damage of the fight with some elbows from the full mount. In the fourth, Paddy started showing off some hands that I didn't know he had. Paddy won another round. Bilal's eye is disappearing, which might hurt his chances for the rest of this tournament. They had a competitive fifth round, but in true Bilal fashion, this fight went to a decision. Paddy won, but he's going to carry some battle scars heading into the next round. Next up, we have Curtis Blaydes versus Manel Kape, which in hindsight was morally wrong to set up. Curtis Blaydes loves to wrestle, but he had such a strong striking advantage, he kept a lot of this fight on the feet, and he won this one with a silent knockout.
Oh, straight to the body by Manel Kape.
I think he might have killed him. Leon versus Bobby is a pretty close matchup in weight, but Leon was displaying a huge skill gap, especially with his kickboxing. Bobby had a few violent exchanges that at a minimum will ruin Leon's chances in the rest of this tournament. Bobby somehow had the ground game advantage, and that seemed to be keeping him alive in this fight. On the other hand, every head kick he was taking was slowly killing him, but these two made it to the fourth round. Both fighters are wearing a ton of damage, but Bobby is getting rocked by almost every strike. He even got stunned twice and knocked out in the first 30 seconds of this round. Leon was going in for the final blow, but out of nowhere, Bobby lands a flush right hand that knocked Leon out cold. Leon was tied or winning in every statistical category of this fight, but it wasn't enough. Bobby is taking by far the most damage into the next round, but the man survived and the man advances. It's time for the second round, and I didn't know what to expect, but Patty answered my questions almost immediately. He showed up from backstage with a broken nose and blood all over his face, and that is perfect. Considering Tom took no damage in his last fight and is about 100 pounds heavier, I think it's pretty fair to say this is his fight to lose. Patty also had a 5-rounder before this, so he's already gassed from the get-go. And considering the combination of all of these things, it should be pretty clear how this fight is going to end. Tom still hasn't been stunned, he hasn't bled, but you gotta give props to Patty considering the depleted state he entered this fight in. Taking the world champ to the third round is pretty solid. But the entrance to this next fight is even worse. Bobby Green got the shit kicked out of him in his last time out, and because of that, he's entering this fight with a cut on his forehead, a broken nose, and a swollen eye. Curtis Blaydes is entering this fight with a stutter, but that has nothing to do with his previous fight. So realistically, this fight outcome is already decided, but it all comes down to how much can Bobby Green damage Curtis Blaydes before he enters the championship fight. Yeah, of course, Bobby isn't looking too good, but 3 minutes into the fight, he landed this right hook that's going to open up a cut on Blaydes. Bobby makes it to the stool after one round, and Jesus Christ, get this man some Vaseline ASAP. Bobby never landed another good strike in this fight, but he took his beating all the way into the fourth round. The ref was forced to intervene, but Bobby never quit, and technically he did damage Curtis's arms by enduring so many punches. And for the last UFC 304 fight, we have Curtis Blaydes entering the octagon with a cut on the cheek and a swollen eye. Tom, on the other hand, looks brand new. He's got the stamina advantage, and that's all thanks to Bobby Green. This fight would typically be a war, but Bobby threw a perfect assist to Tom, and he brought it home just 3 minutes into this fight. So it's pretty clear how easily a losing fighter can affect the outcome of this type of tournament, and I love that. So we're going to double down on this damage that the fighters have to bring into the octagon with them. The next tournament will feature the maximum amount of fighters, which is 16. It will have the same rules, but instead will include fighters from the most stacked card of all time, UFC 300. And I didn't plan on this originally, but after witnessing Bobby Green's performance in 304, I'm going to add him to this tournament as well. He'll be taking on light heavyweight Alexander Rakic. Above him will be Jamal Hill versus Davison Figueiredo. Regardless of size, Charles Oliveira could definitely make a run in this, but first he'll have to get through Moicano. Yuri Prohaska will face Sadiq Youssef in his first round fight. On the other side, we have Alex Pereira, the favorite to win this, taking on none other than Cody Garbrandt. But his next round fight will be a greater test against either Justin Gaethje or Jalen Turner. Max Holloway will take on Arman Tsarukyan. And lastly, Aljamain Sterling will face Diego Lopez. The double champ entered his first fight with a 14-inch reach advantage because I really didn't have anyone better than Cody Garbrandt to be featured in this tournament. But also, this is the same man who has found answers for an unbeatable champion before. You never know, he could do it again. Never mind. Alex is moving on with a first round knockout. He took little to no damage and at the cost of very little stamina, which will be very important in a tournament where the winner has to win 4 fights in one day. Next up, we have Justin Gaethje versus Jalen Turner. It only took a minute for proof that this fight is far more competitive than the last. Jalen cut open Gaethje. Gaethje responded by shaking Jalen's brain. Jalen might have actually won this first round with his kickboxing, but at the rate they're going, I don't see this one going to a decision. On top of that, the winner is facing Poatan, who's probably dancing in the locker room right now to keep warm for them. And Jalen Turner never got his feet going again outside of the first round. This man can take a punch or two, but Justin Gaethje turned his lights off a few too many times, and eventually it was too much for Jalen to continue. The blood in this octagon is already starting to pile up, and Max Holloway is looking to double that and give it to the next person. Except Arman came out dominating this fight on the feet. He won this round with multiple stuns, but Max Holloway could be the ultimate sabotager. Even after losing losing this round decisively, he has already ruined Arman's eye health for future fights. And poor Max fell ill with the Johnny Walker bug. He just kept making stupid decisions, falling face first into punches, having delayed reactions, and yeah, that ended up with him getting knocked out. Diego Lopez versus Aljamain Sterling wasn't the war that we've been accustomed to so far. Even though the settings are on default, this tournament has led to every fighter standing toe-to-toe banging it out, but not Aljamain. He went nut to nut with Diego and kept cranking away at his leg. He won this fight with an armbar, which is a good reminder that you really don't have to be that durable or a great striker to win this tournament. You could always just win by submission like the original winner did. But on the other hand, you could also be like Yuri and reorganize your opponent's spine after just a few minutes of fighting and still live to fight another day. Charles Oliveira versus Moicano went just about as expected. They got down and busy on the mat for 25 minutes straight and went to a decision. Yet somehow this ended up being one of the bloodiest fights so far, and it's really starting to pile up on the mat now. Oliveira won by split decision, but his face is in bad shape for just one fight, so we'll see how that turns out for him. You might expect Jamal Hill versus Davison to be a blowout and just be a dominant victory by Jamal Hill, but that was not the case. You see, Davison's got that dog in him. He might be the size of a chihuahua, but this chihuahua can check a fucking leg kick like nobody's business. Yeah, he got obliterated, got his face butchered, and was knocked out, but he made sure Hill will remember him with 7 leg health events in 3 rounds. But Bobby Green is back and he said, "Hold my goddamn beer, brother." He went out there and delivered 17 leg health events to Alexander Rakic. Yeah, he lost this fight, but he never lost his dignity. He made this light heavyweight beat him by decision, and Rakic wouldn't be allowed to fight for months after this leg-breaking assault, let alone later this day. So we'll see how this turns out for him in the next round. Gaethje is back. He's got a few cuts and bruises, but generally he looks all right. Poatan looks like he hasn't fought yet. Seriously, Gaethje's damage coming into this fight was very minimal. But after taking a few punches from Alex, the doctor had to come in and take a look at him. And yeah, his eye is gone. The fight needs to be stopped. This isn't Russia. But no, they're just gonna keep letting him fight the hardest hitting man in human history. And what could go wrong? Gaethje did a good job surviving and at a minimum tiring out Alex, but he took one good combo and the doctor is back. This fight should be over, but no. Dana called in some health and safety violation favors and the fight will go on, but not for much longer. From a medical perspective, I think Alex did Justin a favor by quickly knocking him out, and Alex will be moving on to the semifinals with little to no damage. But his next opponent is destined to be a change of pace for him. First, we've got Aljamain Sterling, who is bringing in some minor damage. Then there's Arman Tsarukyan.
That's a lot of damage. How about a little more?
I think Arman might have taken the cake when it comes to the amount of blood on your face while entering a fight, but Charles went to a split decision before this and his eye is already shut before entering the cage. Now, it didn't help that Yuri came out hot and knocked down Charles twice in the first 30 seconds, but just about after a minute into this fight, the doctor came in and actually called off the fight after just one look. I can't disagree with that decision, but it is a shame because Charles definitely could have made a run in this tournament regardless of weight. Next up, we have 2 paralyzed 205ers who are coming into this fight with a combined 24 leg health events between them. On top of that, they're both walking into this fight with a pretty good amount of facial damage. It seems like both of them were aware of the fact that their opponent's legs were made of spaghetti at this point, but it was Jamal Hill who had the upper hand here. His character already spams leg kicks as it is, but with the work that Bobby Green already put in, this ended up being a fairly easy victory for him. With that victory, Jamal Hill moves on to the semifinals, but maybe even more impressively, Alexander Rakic took 31 leg health events over the span of 2 fights before he finally had enough. For the first semifinal fight, we have Aljamain Sterling taking on Alex Pereira. Aljamain is looking pretty healthy for being one of the lightest fighters in this tournament, and he has a decent chance of beating Alex with his ground game. Aljo immediately tried taking this fight to the ground, but Alex made him be patient and pay the price first. Aljamain got his takedown after taking some brain damage. He ended up going for a head and arm triangle. Alex's stamina dropped, his submission bar dropped, but he got out of it. Aljamain wasn't leaving empty-handed though. He got full mount and did some damage. damage. The second round barely got started, really no big strikes have occurred, and the doctor is already stepping in to take a look at Aljo's eye. You know, it doesn't look great, but compared to the rest of the eyeballs I've gotten a closer look at in this tournament, that looks pretty healthy to me. Things weren't looking good for Aljo after this. He went for a takedown, didn't get it, and left with a hurt leg. He was then stunned, knocked down, and almost had his head sent into the parking lot, but Alex was a bit late on that move. Aljo took a few more big shots before making it back to the stool. And yeah, now would be a pretty reasonable time for the doctor to take a look at that eye of his that is still apparently there. And it wasn't like Aljo was going to come out in the third and be a defensive machine. He got knocked around. The doctor came in and he had to call off this fight. For the other semifinal fight, we have Jamal Hill taking on Yuri Prochazka. Jamal Hill enters the octagon with a few cuts and bruises, but worst of all, it looks like he has lost his will to live, and that was for good reasoning. This fight was over before it started. Every strike that landed on Jamal was extra painful for him. Any solid leg kick or punch to the head would sit him down, so knockout was bound to happen, but the doctor got in the way first and took him out of this fight in the second round. So for the final, we have Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira. It's pretty impressive that even though both of these guys have beaten 3 guys each in one day, all they have to show for it is a few bruises. The thing keeping this from being a standard fight though is their stamina. Yuri has a bit of an advantage coming into this, and he has Aljo's wrestling and Charles's face to thank for that. No diddy, 3 men in one night couldn't make these men bleed, but it only took 2 minutes for these two to draw blood on each other. In true Yuri fashion, he became the first fighter in this tournament to truly hurt Alex, and he did it with a body shot. Yuri went for a takedown, Alex stuffed it and gave him a knee to the face as a going away present, and I think that just broke Yuri's nose. Yuri stunned Alex early in the second. He had him glitched up against the cage, but he couldn't get the knockout. But just like that, the doctor is stepping in to take a look at Alex's eye, which is shutting quickly. The rest of the second round was very competitive. This fight could go either way, and there's no way this makes it to the judges. In between rounds, it was pretty apparent that Alex's nose has a boo-boo. By the third round, it felt like any decent strike that landed was a guaranteed stun or knockdown. The doctor made another appearance, and for the second time in this fight, he's here for Pereira. It seemed like Yuri was on his way to a rare win over Alex. He's landing big shots, he's wearing less damage, and then the camera flipped around and revealed a pile of blood hiding on the other side of his face. The doctor is back again to pretend to do his job and just say what's up to Herb Dean. Yuri went on to win the third round, but if this fight somehow makes it to a decision, it would be a miracle. Alex started off strong in the fourth with a strong right to the back of Yuri's head. Yuri responded with a front kick that knocked down Alex. Alex came right back with a front kick of his own and followed that up with a spinning back fist that knocked down Yuri. The end is near for these two, but it's coming down to who can land the perfect strike first. And Alex is making a comeback. He's blocking punches. He hits a left hook, and Yuri is slowly falling down to the mat, but he gets back up, and out of nowhere, he has the energy to throw a full power overhand left, which finally knocks Alex Pereira out cold. This is the first time I have ever seen an AI Yuri beat an AI Alex. All it took was changing the rules of the UFC entirely, but a win is a win, and this man has earned it. He might have had some help along the way thanks to some legendary sabotagers, but that's just how this sport was meant to be. This format would obviously never happen again in the UFC in today's day and age, but there's nothing some bored rich oil tycoons in the Middle East can't put together. I think it might be time they let boxing go and make MMA a blood sport again. Let me know how you think this would turn out in real life and if you think the simulations got it right. But that's going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to go make your vote in UFC 5, and I will see you in the next one.